Welcome to this CG Pro webinar. Tonight even, we are going to be talking about virtual production and the various jobs, roles, departments in virtual production. We find this is a question that comes up a lot, and there's a lot of confusion around what people do in virtual production and how this is a new industry. How is this different from production itself? So I'm going to take a second here to introduce some of the other people that we've got here tonight to talk about this. Very pleased to have this great group of people with us tonight. We have Wolfie. Wolfie is a cinematographer and DP, is a specialist in virtual production and has come up through production for the last 30 years. Wolfie, welcome. Great to have you here. Scott Rosekrans is the head of real-time at Zoic Studios. Scott has been a visual effects artist for the last 15 years at Zoic, which is a very pioneering visual effects studio, and has done a lot in virtual production going back 10 years plus, before virtual production was even a word. And Scott, welcome. Great to have you here as well.
Hey gang, thanks for having me.
You bet. David Ethan Sanders is also a cinematographer and is going to be helping us to moderate this evening, help to wrangle some of the chaos and ask us some questions when we get to the panel section. So David is a seasoned cinematographer himself and producer and our moderator for this evening.
Hello everybody.
Virtual production departments and jobs. We're going to be talking about the roles within virtual production, what they are, what they mean, how they differ from previous roles, what ones are the same, what ones are new. A little note about CG Pro. We are an Unreal authorized training center. We're a school. We're founded by virtual production industry professionals. We are a connectors partner with Epic Games, so we teach Unreal Engine. We teach a lot of virtual production around Unreal Engine. We teach a lot of Unreal Engine. We are the premier online virtual production school, and we teach completely live and with mentorship and ongoing support. We also, as it says, do custom training for companies, studios, and educational institutions as well. Just a brief agenda for tonight. We're going to go through a short presentation. I'm just going to talk a little bit, give a little bit of a primer about virtual production as we get into the conversation. We'll start talking about it as we go through that, because there's some good talking points as we go through some of these slides here. Then we're going to have a general panel discussion about virtual production and the roles in virtual production. And we'll have a Q&A. So we should be able to take questions from the audience, as this is a live studio audience. We'll be taking questions, and we have a producer in the background who's going to be feeding some of those through. So please do ask questions as we go. Somebody will be pushing those forwards to us. So yeah. So virtual production, this is David Marin's take on it from Epic Games. The ability to mix live footage and computer graphics at once to get real-time feedback and to make decisions on set about the VFX and animation. It's real-time computer graphics on set, where real-time computer graphics can and do inform your decisions as a filmmaker. VP is also the process of creating the digital world, beginning with the inception of the movie and ending with the final VFX, centered around the real-time interaction on set. VFX is no longer considered post. The order of production is no longer in order. So it's shaking things up, it's changing the way we do things, and that results in new ways of doing things, new jobs, and that's what we're here to talk about this evening. So it could be broken down into several major areas, one of them being visualization, for example, previs, techvis, all the vises. We also have performance capture, where we're just dealing with the capture of animation from characters and animals and cameras. We have green screen, where we can do what we used to do with green screen, but we can now do it in real time. And ICVFX, where you have a big fancy LED wall behind you, so you can hope to capture everything in camera. Those are the kind of major flavors of virtual production that are often discussed and talked about. So this diagram, we're going to just quickly run through this as we go. There'll probably be some talking points, so anybody feel free to chime in as I go through this. So productions usually start with a production company of some sort. Production company has some kind of major leaders from the exec producer, director. Directors often hired in. They have an idea that they're trying to accomplish, and in virtual production, there's a need for some new characters to help try and break this down. There's some major departments that the production company would either have or employ from external vendors. So those would include usually production services, VFX or post-production, new area which is virtual production services. VFX companies might include people like Digital Domain, Industrial Light and Magic. Virtual production services can come from some of those companies are now doing virtual production services as well. But there are some companies that specialize in virtual production services, such as Lux Machina and Narwhal Studios, formerly Happy Mushroom. So they specialize in virtual production, doing some overlap to VFX. They would usually have an art department responsible for creating the art of the piece that you're going to make, from concept art to physical props and that kind of thing that are going to be used on set. Editorial, being able to cut all of your shots and the pieces and things from visual effects together into the final movie, and sound. The visual effects company would normally employ a visual effects supervisor, considered to be like the director of visual effects. And in virtual production, now these orange bubbles here are starting to define the kind of major roles within virtual production. So we would, in virtual production, often have a VP supervisor. That's somebody who should really understand most of the things that a visual effects supervisor understands, and they understand the cross section of production and computer graphics. The VP supervisor should understand that, and all the virtual production techniques and technologies that are used, how to use them to accomplish what the goal is of this production. Going across back to the production services, this is going back to the traditional way of things, and still all of these things are still employed. So we have camera department, lighting department. Within visual effects, we often want to use animation in virtual production, so they would have an animation department. Within VFX and post, you would also start to create a stage technical operator department to be able to run a volume where you would work on virtual production. You would have it's often called a brain bar, not a popular name by all accounts, but people are starting to call it volume control or some other things, so that'll probably go away at some point. But stage technical operations, essentially. Then this idea of the virtual art department, and the virtual art department is the kind of twin of the art department, and the virtual art department being responsible for the virtual art in what's going to be displayed on an LED wall or be in the virtual space. The mocap and tracking department, these are not always departments, so take this with a pinch of salt. This is a vision and a way of trying to sort of simplify what can be a lot of different things depending on the production. But we have mocap and tracking, responsible for capturing motion from characters, also cameras, being able to use those in production. This is just an extra note to say that whilst VFX and visual effects companies are capable of doing this kind of work and is starting to become more and more capable, there are also these virtual production services companies, and they are also capable of having a virtual production supervisor, creating a volume control, employing a VAD. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a VFX company, can be a virtual production services company. The virtual production supervisor, as you can see here, is responsible for and knows about and supervises various departments, from the motion tracking to the VAD. Within the lighting department and the camera department, we have the idea of a director of photography and gaffer to be controlling the lights. Within virtual production, we also start to introduce the idea of a virtual gaffer, somebody who can be in the virtual space, lighting that to match the real lighting, the practical lighting on set.
The other term for that is the rigger, if you're coming from more computer side of things.
Right. And within animation, the animation department, we have usually an animation supervisor, especially on a bigger production. You have an animation supervisor supervising animators to create motion. You may just be using mocap, you may be using animators, but either way, we're going to have an animation supervisor, probably some animators. There's often as this shows, a colorist who's responsible for making sure that the colors represented properly, both on a wall, within the virtual space, through cameras, just making sure there's consistency with the color spaces in the many different places where it can be altered through the pipeline. So they're responsible for making sure there's consistent going through. Within the stage technical operator, volume control, brain bar department, there is multiple roles, potential roles within here, from pipeline TDs, people helping to create and then run the pipeline for a show, people loading scenes ready for shoot, people developing tools. A stage manager is often responsible for making sure the VP supervisor's right-hand person to make sure that the stage is running properly. You have operator or many operators potentially on driving computers that are running a real-time engine, most often Unreal Engine these days. They are responsible for making sure that it's running. Once you're into shoot, you often have people recording takes as you shoot. You would be shooting and recording takes much like you do in real shoot. You would be recording takes onto hard drives. With this, you'd be doing the same thing, capturing practical photography, but also recording camera motion as well at the same time. And possibly other things within the real-time engine as well. So people recording data, wrangling the data, and making sure that the camera integrates properly, the physical camera integrates properly with the virtual camera. With the virtual art department, we have a VAD supervisor, often, who's looking after a team of artists. This is what I was doing essentially as VAD lead on The Lion King, looking after a team of artists, developing assets. We would be not necessarily doing pre-light in the VAD, although sometimes they might be doing that. That's often the job of the virtual gaffer over there, working with the DP to pre-light scenes. With the VAD, you also have people who are on set, who are making sure that if there's any adjustments that need to be done on set during the shoot, that there's somebody from the VAD who understands the set, understands the world, and understands how to move it, take instruction, and make changes. You also have layout artists who are constructing the world, taking those assets, laying them out, and building a world. And within the mocap and tracking section or department, you may have a mocap supervisor, you may have a camera tracking supervisor. If you're lucky to have enough budget for all of these people, you would have somebody responsible for each one. Where you don't, you have one or fewer people doing a lot of different things. So ideally you'd have multiple people running this thing. You also, under the mocap supervisor, would have the usual kind of mocap artists, so people who are going to be recording the mocap whilst you're doing mocap sessions, people who are cleaning up that data as it comes out of those sessions, performers who are performing and creating the data, and I think at the end there are obviously a ton of other people behind the scenes who should have got credit here who didn't, so my apologies to them. They're way down the credit list, but there's a lot of other people behind the scenes supporting what's going on. This is an attempt to simplify the possible roles that may go into virtual production.
I think it's important to note here too that this could be even further simplified depending on the scale of the production. I mean, this represents, I think, some of the more bigger budget style productions where you have the ability to have these roles broken down into this many, but there are some shoots that are still run and gun, indie style, low budget, and you're going to have sometimes all 6 of those stage techs wrapped up into one brain, one person.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and it's thinking back to my friend John Brennan driving on Jungle Book. It was him basically in the hot seat, and it's been his mission ever since to get more help in that department because there's a lot of things that need doing. It's very stressful doing that on set, and yeah, definitely you're absolutely right. And this is a vision of it. As you said, you can wrap the entire VAD essentially into one person as well, if depending on the shoot. Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts on this before I move on?
Well, I think it is just it's important to state how lucky we are to be in an industry that we're at a moment where we can grow and define roles like this too. I mean, there's so many, like I was just going about my day the other day, had a flat tire, I had to go change that, drop my kids off at school, like all these jobs and careers that other people have that don't have chances to expand or grow or have innovations or things like this. I think we're incredibly lucky, and it's very cool to I mean, this isn't new to us, right? The 4 of us sitting here, we've been talking about this for the last 3 years or so. We've been into this, but there's still many people just now jumping in, getting their feet wet with virtual production, learning about it, and I think it's still very new to a lot of people. And there's people I talk to all the time that don't know what this new technology is. They just watch TV and commercials and movies, and they don't care, but they do eventually hear about it. And it's very cool to be still, to us, it's 3 years in or more, some of us. And yeah, it's very cool to be in a place where you're able to innovate and grow and have a lot of new roles and need a lot of new people and skill sets coming in.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an exciting time. There's a lot of change, which can bring about, I don't know, other things as well, fear and confusion, but there's a tremendous amount of excitement. Fear and excitement occupy the same part of your brain, I think, and that's what we want to do tonight is talk about how exciting it is and how new people might be able to enter the industry, or people who've been in the industry already in production or visual effects. I was dragged off the visual effects pipeline for Jungle Book a good number of years ago, and at that point this wasn't really a thing. It was kind of an experiment, and now we're at that point where there's definitely more people looking at it and trying to understand it and trying to see where do they fit in it. So that's our attempt here, is to talk about how some of these roles are new, some of them are not new, some of them are the existing role with a bit extra on top. Yeah, I know, Wolfie, for you've been in traditional production for many years, and the last number of years you've also become really excited about this area.
It's an interesting time. What it feels like for me is there's this invisible field, and it's all the same work. It's just the field just drifts, and either you're still physical or you're doing exactly the same thing but virtual, right? So it's
Right.
I got my first job was working in a short film that was being animated, and they're like, we need a cinematographer to come in and dress up the lighting and dress up some camera moves and this kind of thing. And I'm like, I don't know animation, but if you think I can help. And then I got in there, I was like, oh yeah, no, your light's in the wrong place. It needs to be 3/4 behind, and you need a long, big overhead light, 200 feet long, down this room to create a base. And it was like, I just went right back to work. It was, you walk into a location and you start doing lighting. It just was a virtual space that was 3-dimensional, so it was like looking at a smaller model of the same thing, but all of the same principles applied, everything I learned over the, 30 years in live action applied.
All right. So yeah, we can jump ahead here as well. Just I wanted to briefly show these slides before we get through to the panel section and start really getting into this conversation. These, feel free, anyone watching, to take screen grabs or whatever. I'm kind of going to flash through these. We're not going to dwell on them, but I'm going to go through these 4 kind of major areas of all the vises, performance capture, green screen, and IC VFX. Talk about some of the roles. In the visualization, there's a lot of overlap between all of these. There are a lot of those roles that apply to every single one of those, and that really is a way of trying to quantize everything in virtual production into 4 slots, which isn't really how it works necessarily, but yeah, a lot of the jobs are going to be similar. A lot of VAD, a lot of visual effects, crossover. A lot of visual effects artists who want to get into virtual production enter through the VAD because there's a place where it's familiar. They're making things, they're building things, they're lighting things. Within the volume as well, there's lots of familiar roles and some new ones. Within performance capture, we're talking about a lot of traditional mocap jobs, plus some new, depending on whether you're doing mocap in a volume or not. Within the green screen way of doing things, definitely a lot of traditional production roles, from traditional camera and lighting, and then some new roles coming in through the virtual production section. Also a lot of, again, crossover with the VAD and with Unreal Engine operators if you're shooting it live. We have also some green screen operators, some specialisms in green screen, being whether you're doing it through a third-party tool that's built on top of Unreal Engine or using a hardware keyer. There some very familiar stuff there and a few new things. In-camera VFX, which is kind of what's being used to describe working in an LED volume, I guess. The interesting thing about this whole thing, I think, is that the language, terminology, job titles is a little fluid. A lot of them are just same as what they were before. There are some new roles within IC VFX. We've got all the virtual production roles, the production roles, the camera department roles, the visual effects roles from previously to now the VAD and animation. We've got also a lot of the art department still the same. They're still building physical props, putting them on set. They may also then be sending those through to the VAD and scanning them and being able to have them both virtually and in real IRL, in real life. And there's one thing which actually I wanted to mention, going quickly back to this one here, is that often I worked on a couple of things that had an art department and a virtual art department, and ideally those want to be the same in the same company, kind of the same department if possible. It's not necessarily always possible, but it can help with the flow of producing work and passing it between people if they are kind of the same thing. So that's why I drew that dotted line around those two, because it's nice if they're the same thing.
I think it's important to note too, while we're there, if you go back up, is that this is, you have a note there, but I think it's important to say it out loud, is this list is not exhaustive, and it's one example. You're gonna, as you start paying attention, there's a lot of companies and people putting these types of things out there to kind of, there's a big push now to standardize this, right? There's been a lot of it's been chaotic, and these, you can even see now, even in our attempt to organize it, there's a lot of noodles and spaghetti going on there. So there's a big push to kind of standardize this, and that's one of the reasons we're doing this tonight, is just to jump on that train and put our ideas on paper in terms of like what we've been seeing a lot of lately.
Yeah, it's really interesting that there's a lot of conversation around in some of the groups that I'm in about standards in education and standards in virtual production, and it's kind of it's tough to do and have standards in something that's so young and so new.
Our standards are definitely sitting down.
Right. So I just want to take a second before we get into the panel talk about how CG Pro fits into this just briefly. We have some classes that we've been running for a couple of years now that emerged from the things that I've learned on the movies I've worked on, from Lion King and Jungle Book and other experiences, to also our other instructors, and there's a couple of them on the panel coincidentally. But bringing in industry expertise to create some classes to help train for some of these new roles. Our Unreal for Filmmakers program, this one on the left, this is our flagship program. It's meant to teach people from beginner level right up to being able to create a 1 to 2 minute short film. It can teach you all of the things that you need to know in Unreal Engine to be able to make a short film. Obviously, in 2 months, there's going to be more that you can learn. So we have some specialist classes that go into more advanced level and advanced topics. We have an Unreal Advanced Character class, which is about to start on Saturday, so in a couple of days. It's our last one for this year. That is a real deep dive into characters. We go through how to bring in custom characters, custom metahumans as well, talking about motion and mocap and advanced character effects such as cloth and hair, and how to basically, it's 6 weeks of completely focusing on character workflows in Unreal Engine and everything that you would need to know, taught by the illustrious Scott Rosekrans, who is a character specialist and very talented one. So jump in on Saturday if you want to come and learn with us. IC VFX and green screen, this is kind of our volume control or brain bar course. This one is a 4-week. We're going to change it to a 6-week one next year. That one is really training for the volume control, being an on-set technical artist. That one is again taught by Scott. And cinematography and lighting for virtual production, Wolfie is one of our instructors for that class. That one is for cinematographers, how to work in virtual production, and for visual effects artists, also how to work in virtual production. But for some of us VFX artists, we haven't been through the production workflow. We don't understand on set very well unless we've been CG supervisors or visual effects supervisors. So this is bringing that high level professional cinematography to people that have not had it before. That one's a really exciting class, and I love taking that one myself, because whilst I've been on set for a number of years, there's always more to learn there, and Wolfie's a great teacher.
I just wanted to point out to everybody, if you've ever wanted to take the Unreal Fellowship, and it's super exclusive and it's very difficult to get into, basically all the things that are covered in the Unreal Fellowship are covered in Unreal for Filmmakers Connector program. So if you're a beginner, start there. And, Ed and Jackie, CG Pro is one of the few certified by Epic Games instructors. So they've been through extensive training with Epic Games and are actually teaching very checklisted, certified things that are standardized education. So I think those are the 2 points you might have missed if somebody's watching and like, hey, why would I go with CG Pro or anywhere else? Like that's a really important one. And then like my program's super fun. The CG, the cinematography one's like the fun one. It's the most creative, and a lot of people have a lot of fun in that one.
Awesome. Thanks, Wolfie. Yeah, it's come and join us if you want to. Obviously, there's a lot of video out there. You can go learn by video. I've done a lot of that myself, do a lot of that myself. If you want to learn it from professionals, if you want to learn it more quickly than spending a couple of years teaching yourself, then please reach out, arrange a call with one of our admissions people, and come find out some more. I won't bang on any more about that, but very proud of what we've done there. So I wanted to mention that. And for next year, we have some exciting new things, not all of them listed here, but we're going to be launching a world building class, which is focused on VAD, a producers class, because a lot of producers out there who want to understand virtual production from that perspective, broadcast and live events class, and for interactive and game development, we have a new track that's going to be starting next year as well. Yeah, that's the end of the presentation. So we can jump into the panel and start having more of a
Right.
discussion.
Well, that was great. And I have a couple questions that I've prepared to lead conversation. Some of them are directly to our guests, and others are sort of free-for-alls for anyone who's interested. But you just did a great job laying out sort of a constellation of roles that currently exist, in camera production. We've seen a snapshot as it is. And so one of the questions I have is, as this evolves, as it has been, do we see it getting more streamlined as the technology evolves and becomes more integrated? Scott mentioned that big productions versus indie productions, the crew contingent looks very different. What we just saw looked like mission control, or nuke nodes is another way someone described it. How does this crew contingent pare down from that large diagram that we just looked at into sort of an indie perspective? What does a smaller, more agile indie crew on the XR side of things look like?
That's a very good question. Yeah, I mean, I think Scott started to talk about that in that realistically, it depending on what your budget is, what your resources are, basically, because budget is not just money. It's you may have a bunch of stuff lying around that you can use as a independent filmmaker. We teach a lot of people in the Unreal for Filmmakers class that are one person to represent that entire mess that I showed just now. And that's like the other extreme is like where that is just one person, like going from the idea all the way down through the finished piece, and including live action integration. In that sense, it could be one person. No, that full spectrum of one. That's the amazing thing about right now for me, is that individuals can take this on. You don't need a team. And it was the same in visual effects when I first got into it 15 years ago, or even before that. You needed a lot of equipment and a lot of people to accomplish anything. Now it is actually possible as an individual to go out with a piece of green cloth and a camera and some understanding of Unreal and produce something that's live action integration with one person, and then everything in between. So I think how you pare it down, this is the interesting part for me for the producers kind of question, the how people approach this. I always like to think of it in terms of what is the challenge that you're trying to solve, what's the thing you're trying to accomplish, and what is the most, like I used to be an engineer, and I often go back to thinking that way in the creative medium as well. Like, what's the most efficient way that you can make this happen? Even when you have a big budget, sometimes you don't just want to start hiring people and buying things. You want to do it in a efficient way first. And I think still in this world, starting like ramping in to the bigger sense of it, having smaller teams, and then kind of seeing what you need, experimenting with it. And maybe because some of the movies I've worked on have been so experimental, like The Lion King was basically a R&D lab for like how do we do this, and that was no live action. Jungle Book had live action in it. So it all starts with the producer, but the producer, to me, needs to start talking to the virtual production supervisor, somebody that really understands it, and then having that conversation early about what are the ways that we could accomplish this, because there's a lot of different ways. And they may have a budget at the beginning that might really help to define, well, like, okay, we have, I don't know, we have $100,000 for the VAD. Okay, what does that buy you? It shouldn't have to be the way that it's defined, but often is. You have to work with your limitations.
I'll also add to that, Ed. I'm sorry to cut you off there if you had
No, please do. Yeah.
No, I'll add to that too. Is that from my perspective, I'm seeing a lot of, because we have a lot of people coming and going in our department, that there's a lot of retraining and training up people coming from different careers. There's a lot of generalization. So the nesting up of these roles is happening a little bit more naturally. Like you saw that I'm teaching both the animation course and the stage tech ICVFX course. Those are two very different roles, but I have a background in animation and rigging and things like that. So that came a little bit more natural to me. That was a natural progression into once I got comfortable in Unreal. But I also gravitated to the ICVFX stuff, and that was my new retraining, my second life in VFX, right? So we have a lot of people like that we work with. Like I've got one of my strongest artists was a camera tracker who's just, he just loved doing cameras and stuff like that, and he learned to code on the side, and he turned out to be one of our greatest blueprint artists, and a strong technical artist. And so like very two different roles, and very different bubbles in this diagram here, but you have that cross-pollination. And I think there's, with a lot of people coming from different backgrounds, there's a lot of opportunity to do that type of stuff. So it happens a little bit more natural that you can condense those roles.
Great. So based on what we just heard, it sounds like a big part of it has to do obviously with the budget that you're working with, but it does sound like things are evolving and roles are combining, and based on what you said, Scott, maybe some of that is happening in an organic way as people combine pre-existing skills with some retraining that's happening in this realm, ultimately making a hybrid being.
Yeah, totally.
Are there any roles that we see sort of specifically being eliminated as we evolve? Would maybe be a question. The streamlining take place?
I don't think so. We've still had the need to rely on traditional VFX 100%. We're more integrating into that pipeline, and then the cross pollination is happening both ways. The VFX pipeline is still there, right? And
right.
There's some interest in people wanting to sort of cross over or try things out or streamline or work on some previs in in their spare time and things like that. But the traditional VFX pipeline I don't think is going anywhere, and I don't think that was the point. That wasn't, I think, I hope there's no animus between the visual effects artists out there, because it's the virtual production was never meant to replace it, and just like Midjourney is not meant to replace any traditional artistry. It's
right.
It's
these are complementary tools that apply to like specific situations.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's a lot of that as virtual production started to be talked about more, there was a lot of that kind of fear coming from, I think, traditional visual effects artists that I remember compositors talking about, is Unreal Engine going to take my job as a compositor away? If we're shooting everything in camera, does that mean there's no more comp? And it's not at all the case. The compositing is not just about putting one thing in front of the other. It's an art in itself, and I think it means that there's, to me it's exciting. I love learning new things. I think essentially humans, we don't really like change much, even if we are excited by new things, but embracing it and learning something new is very exciting. It's what brought me back from thinking of leaving visual effects halfway through my career. I was thinking about just going and doing something else, because my effort level went down a little bit. I'd been pushing it really hard for a long time, and I wanted to coast for a minute, and I coasted for a minute, and I got bored, and I thought about quitting. And bringing it back was actually learning again and growing again. So this has brought back a huge amount of rekindling for my passion for computer graphics, and I think embracing it is the way to go, rather than being scared of it, and just having a go, dipping your toe in, seeing what it's like, trying it out. There's still tons of traditional visual effects going on, for sure.
I would argue, even to add on that, I would argue that even if you don't embrace it, you should embrace it even if you don't use it, right? Because this is pushing for the V-Rays, the Arnolds, the Nukes of the world to be you're seeing more of a reliance on GPU in real time, even out in the traditional offline rendering world, right? And so to get, who doesn't want their renders to happen faster, right? to have a, you know, if you're doing traditional lighting, traditional VFX, and you know you're doing your V-rated nuke workflow, that's fine, but make it faster. You know, so it's pushing the technology. So I think it's not just on our side.
I think it's definitely like
So
Doctor Strange love. You know, it's like how I learned to stop worrying and love Unreal Engine. You know.
So let's talk a little bit about evolving into new roles. And Wolfie, I had a question for you. As DPs, we've always been the heads of production crew. We're in charge of the technical departments. And coming from that background, I recently had an experience as a VP supervisor on a in-camera shoot. So I saw it on the other side of the mirror and worked closely with the DP there. And so, you know, for DPs and for people that come from live action, you know, how do you see this relationship evolve when you're working with new department heads? You know, in the VFX team that you're working with, there is a virtual someone needs to keep the holistic view, and I know you're quite good at doing this dance. You know, what would you say about preparing for that role as a DP, and who has authority there?
You know, well, I mean, first of all, like as a cinematographer, your job is to set the look of the show and the energy of the camera movement and the quality of the lighting and the feeling and the emotional content of the piece, and to make sure that always serves the director's vision. At the end of the day, that's what you're doing. You're the midwife to the director's vision, right? So now, you know, we used to have a really hard time, like when we would shoot green screen, you know, we're showing a director on set a green object with a bunch of actors, you know, some wearing capes, and you're like, and the big crazy thing goes across the sky like this and then explodes. Okay, when I say explode, everybody react to the explosion. And you got 5 actors looking every which way, a grip with a 2x3 and a piece of tape on it. And you're just like, and explosion. And you get, and you get one person like, and it's all over the place, right? So like we're in camera visual effects, and, you know, virtual production is starting to replace the pain that you feel from green screen. Right now, you can put the actors in an immersive environment. Now the director is looking at like, oh, there's the building in the background. Oh, we're way too close to that building. I want to feel sky because I got the little like devil creatures coming in from the portal. Like, oh, okay, move it back, the virtual camera back. Oh, okay, now we're composing a shot. Oh, now I'm live matching my lighting to lighting that I already did in the virtual sessions with the virtual gaffers. The, you know, so like as a cinematographer, I now again have control over post, because I can be in there working with the sets and lighting the sets virtually and making it conform and making it so that I also know some physical limitations about my physical set that I'm going to be working on. Like, oh, I've got a wall here and I can't put a 20K there. I have to light from the right because of the sound stage we're on is a little goofy, right? So I'm like, no, put the sun over there. Okay, great, right? So it's still another area where, just like green screen, you have to know a lot of technical things to be a cinematographer for that. And there's a lot of hidden things that can wreck your day on the shoot that you need to guide production through in the pregame. And, you know, as a cinematographer specializing in this, I have a big checklist of like, okay, this will screw us. Who's doing this? Let's see it. Where are we in it? Do they need extra support? And I know 3 different people from my, you know, workshops and, Epic Games fellowships and CG Pro classes. I've met people in those classes that are great at that, and I've seen their work. So call this person, they'll come in and fix that, you know? So that's sort of like, you know, you lead upwards and you lead downwards. You know, the reverse is like I was on an elevator pitch shooting a 7-camera show, and, you know, I'd be talking to my operators to be like, don't go to 8. Yeah, I need you to put an ND in and go down to like 3.5 on your stop. You're too in focus on the wall. I want to feel multiple layers of focus. I don't, you know, or it's like, don't do 2.8 because it's like, now I just got a blurry thing and an in focus thing. And it looks like an 80s comp, you know? So there's teaching constantly, but I'm always that way as a cinematographer. You're always talking with your gaffer. You're talking to the guys and the gals on the set. You know, you're learning from them and teaching. It's all, you know, that's one of the things I love about the film industry is it doesn't sit still.
You find that a lot of the shows that you're doing, so you're doing a lot of volume shooting these days. Yeah. Do you find that a good number of them is it like the first time that production company's done a volume shoot, and Are you bringing a lot of your experience to them, whereas before in traditional production they kind of had it down and they were telling you what to do a bit more? Now like you're telling them how to do it a bit more?
It's it depends on where you are. 90% of the time, I'm usually the one person in the room that has the biggest picture around all of it, right? There'll be like, I'll have a stagehand who's better at the wall tech. I'll have an Unreal box operator who's better at the Unreal Engine hands-on. But as far as like, being a cinematographer is, 2 or 3 parts mayor of the room and then 7 parts technical expert of the room, right? So like I'll be the one kind of explaining how the whole thing works. I've never worked in a field more where people are just glaze over when you explain what in-camera visual effects are. They're just like 80-foot wide, 20-foot tall TV screen that has a video game engine and you can do 3D stuff in it. And they're like, I got to show you. Come down to this next seminar. Like nobody gets it. I get it. It's so wacky. It's like, it's like explaining the internet to an 8-year-old,
Well, so for those of us who are with us that are in the live action world, and wanting to get, as Wolfie and I am beginning to get more deeply into XR and camera production, it seems like we really have to keep a holistic view. Like it's very important that we, for those people who are approaching it from like a traditional VFX background, and now they're making this bridge into shooting on LED volumes. They're stepping ever deeper into live action. How would you suggest they best prepare?
I mean, I would start with what like I would go with if you're going to jump into the engine and start with trying to do an indie desktop style virtual production. If you just got a little bit of tech that you wanted to do a monitor style shoot, or just if you got a TV you want to throw to or whatever. I mean, yeah, I would get into the engine and once you get the basics down, of course, take its 8-week course to get the connectors program under your belt, and you have a little bit of comfort level. But go to what feels natural, or if you're the type of person to push outside of your comfort zone, and that makes you, if you're a better learner that way. I mean, it's you got to play to your strengths, right? So if your strength is being outside of your comfort zone, go for it. But yeah, I mean, it does feel very natural and very familiar. It's like when when I was going into college, my understanding of 3D animation was kind of naive, thinking that like I was going to be doing kind of literally what I'm doing now, right? That's why it's so much fun for me now, because like I got into 3D and I was like, oh wait, you don't just do all the things, you don't do the animation, the lighting, and it's not all happening all at once, and you've got breakdowns and divisions, your modeling and your rigging is separate, and they're both very hard. You can't do both. There's no way, But now here comes, Unreal, and you can get in there and just kind of sandbox a little bit of each part of that, throw it all together. And any like it's a lot easier to make a specialized person into a generalist. And so once that, I think it'll come a little bit more natural than it was when you were learning the VFX pipeline.
I'd like to add to that, like, if somebody's a cinematographer, this isn't a fake it till you make it. And this isn't I rely on my first AC and my gaffer to get me through this or that. Like, if you're a cinematographer and you're stepping foot on a volume stage and you don't have a functional working of the language of Unreal Engine, you're just doing yourself and the production a disservice. And I see people like, oh, yeah, I can shoot on a video wall. And it's like, do you know what a skylight is? Do you know what it's going to do to certain things? You know what like baked lighting is versus dynamic lighting? If you don't even know those terms, you shouldn't be on that path.
Right.
Like, just stop, because you're just going to embarrass yourself and you're going to crash the day. Like, this isn't a fake it till you make it, right? So take some classes. There's plenty of places where the information is being given. You really need to educate yourself. This isn't, it's not for the faint of heart.
I would agree with that. I think as DPs and just crew in general, we rely a lot on our practical experience, and that's how we learn. But in this case, you really do need to know specific terminology and how to make reference to things that are happening with the game engine that the people on the art side and the VAD team need to hear and understand. So there is that need to take place for sure.
A friend of mine, John Root, has a great phrase about it. He's like, when he's involved in productions and from a technical side in all manner of ways, right? He's like, I will say things to directors of photography, and sometimes I get a lot of ego back, like, don't tell me how to light this, or don't tell me that. And it's like, I'm not trying to tell you how to light it. I'm telling you I got a sensor there. And when you put that flag there, you're going to lose tracking. And in 10 minutes, you're going to be yelling at me about why I lose tracking. So can we work together? Sure. So as cinematographers, it's really important in this to check your ego and really ask your team and give them permission to give you data so that you can better work with the team. They will help you make it a better show. You just got to listen to them,
Excellent. So on the chat thread, I've seen some traffic asking about unions and guilds, and I think these are questions that relate to staff at a higher level, and I saw some of your responses, Ed, but it did make me think, I think these days, still to this day, everyone thinks of XR and LED volumes as being, the pinnacle of an industry experience. It's a very high-end process, a very high-end technique. People associate it with very bottom lines. The resources are quite a lot. However, I've seen now in person some indie style XR LED efforts on some smaller stages, and I'm seeing a lot of smaller stages pop up. How do we see like the indie world evolving behind this? And where do we think accessibility will get?
I'll take a stab at this one because a lot of the people that come through the training is a full spectrum of people completely new to all of these industries, from production and visual effects, trying to get in. There's predominantly people who are trying to convert from either production or visual effects, and then there's a lot of independents. There's a lot of individuals who want to do it, and I think that there's never been a better time to have a go. As I said before, like just in CG, if you wanted to learn Maya, which was the tool that most people were using, you needed a $200,000 computer, a $50,000 license for Maya, and there was only one place you could get to actually have a go. There was no dodgy copies on the internet, because you couldn't even run it on anything. There was no internet as well. So like at that point there was no access. Right now there is you need a computer. Yeah, you need a machine to do this work on. If you're going to do live action integration, you need a camera, obviously. You can use a very affordable camera, a very affordable machine, and a free copy of Unreal Engine, and that's all you need. So a few $1,000s, you can have a go at this, and get together with some friends if even that is too much. But compare like $250,000 to just try one section of it to a few $1,000s to be able to do the whole thing. Now, just financially, it's way more accessible than it's ever been. So just jumping in and having a go, like what I did in the beginning of my career in visual effects was to try and just be around the people who were doing it in every single way that I possibly could, from knocking at the door to like going to all the industry events to doing training classes myself. I just went everywhere that people were doing this, and hassled them basically to let me like observe, or if I could help them in some way, that was the best way, because then you could participate and you could actually try it out. But it's a team sport. Jumping in with other people is the most fun way of doing it, and it's the most learning way of doing it. It's the way you can learn the quickest. It's learning from other people that know it really well. But it's so accessible now. It's so accessible. I know that like our courses are not in everybody's budget range, but they're still pretty affordable compared to they're a quarter of the price of what my education cost in the beginning. And we try and do that as a school too, just make that part of it more accessible. Again, I know it's not for everyone, that's why we do this kind of stuff as well. We do free stuff, but just try and be around people. That's my advice. Find out where those people are. This is what I made it my mission to find out all the events that were going on, every single place that I could. There was no internet back then, so it was me wandering around London looking for this, not literally wandering around, but finding out where people were doing stuff, connecting with them, asking if I could help. Those same principles apply now, but you can literally just have a go yourself. Download, if you have a computer, even if you don't have a computer, if you have a really bad computer that's poorly that doesn't have enough horsepower, you can get a virtual machine. I know it's not 100% simple to do that, but for like $1-2 an hour, you can rent a powerful machine. You can take that part of it out. So I don't feel like there's any excuses these days to being able to have a go and try it out, find the people who are doing it, and jump in and just set yourself a project as well. If you have a project, something you've got to accomplish, especially if you make some sort of public commitment to finishing that project, then you've got to get it done and do it with some other people, have some fun with it.
A project and a deadline, those are the two things you need. But the other thing you really want to think about is, like, on any new adventure, you need to go out and you need a safe space to make your mistakes. And by far, the best place to make mistakes is in front of an instructor live, whether that be on a Zoom call or like in an online class or in person, because then there's especially when it comes to Unreal, it's a legacy piece of software that's evolved over a gazillion years. Unreal 5 just dropped. There's a whole sea change of things that are happening with the lighting. So all the, YouTube videos, half of that's out of date, So it's like, you want an instructor like with CG Pro, we bring some of the, Gabriel teaches the Unreal Engine with me on occasion, and he is in the Epic Games chat groups, knows exactly what's fully working now. Don't use that. That's legacy piece that's going to be gone by 5.3. It's such, you want an expert teaching. It will save you so much time. I couldn't imagine trying to do it the other way.
It is possible. There's a lot of video material out there. Trying to pick it apart is exactly what I did at the beginning of my career. I started with books because I'm that old. Apparently, it was books and DVDs, and that was fine. But I'd get to a page where it was different than it was in the book. I'm like, what do I do now? At that point, there was no YouTube, but now there is YouTube. There's the same thing with videos. There's a huge amount of great video material out there. Always encourage people, download Unreal, start having a go at some of the free video material in the online learning portal, because it's great and it's free and you can get the wheel spinning with it. And then if you want to take it seriously, you want to step it up and you want to go quicker, then go do a course for sure. I'm obviously incredibly biased in saying that because I run a school that teaches it.
Yeah, I'm not, because I'm freelance and I work in the bit, so it's like I'm just telling people what's the easiest way to do it. Hey, let's speaking of good value, maybe we should real quick what we learned this week in Unreal Engine. That's always a fun one. What's the latest thing you learned, Scott?
I don't know if I can't really talk about all the stuff that I've learned this week under
NDA.
I can say that I did have the great pleasure of being, because we have a bi-weekly call with Epic as part of our partnership with them. And they were very excited to hear what we were working on, because it's one of the things that they've given away for free for everyone to use. And we're one of the first people that have said out loud that they were actually trying to use it in production. So it's, we're trying to stay on that bleeding edge of all the stuff that they're able to do. And I think that leads into one of the questions I saw in the chat there was the thoughts on the free software becoming more industry standard versus what's currently. I think it's great to see. It's a nice invigoration And where I'm seeing it a lot more really is that the tried and true visual effects artists are still doing their thing, and they're still perfecting their craft. They're working in Houdini and Nuke, and they're going to continue to work on. There's always new workflows evolving in there, and there's plenty for them to do. They don't need or necessarily have the time to pick up a whole new software package. But where I have been seeing it is at the extremes, right? It's a sandwich, like the bottom and the top. So like the juniors, the ones that are just getting into it, they were at that crossroads of saying, am I going to learn Maya, Houdini, whatever? I'm seeing a lot more of Unreal. And I'm also seeing it at the top, right? The VFX supervisors and the CG supervisors, those that have a little bit more time on their hands and then know software well enough that they can feel comfortable jumping in and spending a week or two picking up a new piece of software and feeling comfortable navigating it. So it's those that between the bottom and the top, that middle is going to start to get pushed a lot more, because you're going to have the people at the top. They're saying, hey, look, I can do this in Unreal. And then you've got the people at the bottom underneath it that are also saying, hey, that thing you're doing there, I can also do that in Unreal. Just check this out. So like, I would honestly say that like, even, as I said, VFX is not going away. Unreal is going to become pushing in from the sides, and I can see where people would feel a bit sandwiched. These free, hopefully they stay free, but the free software right now, it is, and I think it is a good thing that it's free because it doesn't actually answer all the questions yet. There's a reason why we're on with Epic twice a week, trying to figure out new workflows and stuff, but it will get there. It's getting there very quickly. So I don't know if that answered a specific question, but
Scott, maybe
that's a good point. Yeah. With Blender as well, that's another tool that was a total hobbyist tool until like 2.8, and then it started to look kind of interesting. And now you hear stories of people using it in big studios. Maybe it may not be bolted into the pipeline, but they are using it to be able to make things to then throw into the pipeline. And there's more and more stories like that.
Over at Brand Store Studios, while I was there, they had a guy come in and was like, hey, I got an idea for a show. And it was like, they just put a sketch up in Blender real quick and threw it up on the wall as a static background in the volume. Like it's total. I see it being used all the time as a really fast, really high quality sketching device, for 3D use,
It's not even the fact that it used to be because it's free that made it the thing that be its best trait, but now it's actually that it's really good and it is better than certain other programs I won't mention. In some ways, it's I'm excited to see where it goes for sure.
Yeah. So I think we answered a lot of what was asked in the thread, but there was one thing that I wanted to address. We just talked about Maya and Unreal and Blender, and someone asked, what do you think one really needs to know in order to be like job ready, employable on the software side as we go into this? Maybe that's a Scott question.
A real. I don't. Yeah. I'm not looking at certificates or diplomas or things like that. Sure, you went to CG Pro. Who cares? No, I want to see.
We do issue a certificate in case you want one. Yeah.
I want to see a good reel. Show me what you got, right? Like I that's the thing that I'm always going to be looking at. And so if you're gonna drill down, find something that you can put on paper and spend some time honing it and crafting it, and show me that you put in the hours and that you have a spark there.
Got it. So lead with content, lead with expression, make it about how you've used the tools to do your artistry.
Yep,
that's what you want to see.
Tell me that there's passion behind it, right? Like I can't tell you how many interviews I've been on where it's like, yeah, I'm a lighter. What do you want? I like That's great. Do you hire me? I show up, I light, I go home. The end of story. Like that's great. Sure, but I love to see people that are like enthused.
Because then
well, we've talked about.
They don't necessarily go home.
Yes, exactly. Well, yeah.
Here's your chair. We're working on a Marvel show. What's the chain and ball for?
well, for those.
It's a really good point. Passion's a huge one that I hope for as well. It's even more than skill. You can teach somebody skills fairly quickly. But it's very hard to teach somebody passion. That part, is, and passion drives skill every single day. Is more important for me, 100%. And in this industry, you would like to think that a degree does count. honestly, it kind of doesn't. It's great to go to. I value universities to be able to incubate skill, but the actual piece of paper that comes out the other end of it, as a person that's Scott does more hiring visual effects artists these days than I do, but I've never looked at maybe cross check the resume possibly, or look at the LinkedIn profile, but only if the reel makes it worth looking at the piece of paper, and even then usually not. It's I've never cared whether someone has a degree or not. It's can they do the work?
You
Do
know,
they have the
and speaking to that, can they do the work? It's also, it's one thing to get the job. It's another thing to keep the job past the 3-month trial period. And the biggest thing I think, that I see people stub their toe on, where they are caught off guard by it, is that, you train by yourself or in school or wherever, but every way to do with everything in this entire ecosystem, it's how do you interface with the person to the left, the right, up and down, and to the sides, right? So like Ed's seen people get fired because they didn't conform to naming conventions on wonderfully created assets, right? Beautiful table, but you didn't name it the right thing and didn't give it the date, so we couldn't find it, and you kept doing it, and you're just more hassle than you're worth to the team, so you're fired, right? And that, things like that happen, right? So it's like, you really think about how you're interfacing with the group. Make sure you're delivering things like, when I'm on set, I'm talking to the editor. I'm shooting it, but how are you editing it? What codec is this going to broadcast? Is there colorist? So you ask probing questions when you're new to a job, and find out how your settings affect those around you.
Oh yeah, no. I just if we have time for one more question, we've talked about the software and side. For those who want to polish and get their artistry ready to put in front of someone like Scott, what can we say about the hardware that's available? Someone was asking about production trackers, or live action tracking for cameras and stuff. What are some of the things that people can get into?
I think software and hardware is an interesting question. It's like the right tool for the right job. I think for anybody who's an individual looking for a job doesn't need to go out and learn Moses and Stipe and 5 Mars and all of those different things, because you could be on one job, one on another. It's like you very often will hire a person from one of those companies who can run it for you anyway. So I don't think it's necessarily about learning all the pieces of hardware, but understanding the workflow and learning on the content side of things. Unreal Engine is king at the moment. There's no two ways about that. Go learn that, learn it for the role that you're interested in, and learn the workflow, learn what people actually do in production. Don't just learn where the menu options are and what somebody taught you on a YouTube tutorial who's never been in production. Go learn it from people who do use it in production, learn the workflow, learn what people actually do in production, and learn the tools that people use. It's not rocket science. It's the same as what I did in the beginning. And what I tell people to do now, I want a job in visual effects. Okay, I went out and asked visual effects companies, what tools do you use? They said Maya. I'm like, okay, I must learn Maya. I went on to Google, because that did exist at the time. Googled schools that teach Maya really well, found the best one I could, went and learned from them. Within several years of teaching myself, within several months, I was working on a Harry Potter movie, and it was just that simple. It was very hard work, but that conceptually very simple. Go find out what people use, how they use it, go learn how it's done. And then you don't need to learn everything. You don't need to learn all of the pieces of hardware. You don't need to know every single camera that's out there, every single light. It's good to know about them, their qualities, and Wolfie could speak to certainly that side of it better than me. But the workflow, what people actually do, learn that stuff. I think it's the same in the cinematography side, right?
Yeah, you want to know where your ladder is leaning. I think that's super important, right? So it's and you kind of lean more technical, or you lean to the hybrid creative, or you lean like 90% creative, you know? And so if you're really wanting to be doing illustrations, character animations, environment building, don't become a wall operator running the nodes and an expert in Perforce, because that ladder doesn't lead anywhere to where you want to end up, right? So make sure you're not in a cul-de-sac at a job, right? Like take the job that starts out here and goes up to where you want it to go.
That's a really good point. Yeah,
That is a
what you
great
love.
point. Yeah.
Do what you want to do. Don't, because I've seen lots of people in the industries that we're describing just quit because they weren't doing what they wanted to do in the first place. They got shoehorned into this thing. They got known for it. They kept doing it even though they didn't want to do it, and they kept trying to come back into what they really wanted to do, but not really. And then they just kept doing that thing, and they're like, I don't want to do this anymore. They go off and just spin out of the industry. Like, do what Wolfie's totally right. Do what you want to be doing from the beginning.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to turn towards
learn Perforce. I'm sorry. I said it would be great if it's creative or technical if everybody knew Perforce. So.
True. Yeah, or if the gods of Unreal are out there, it would be great if they integrated what Perforce does, where it doesn't take a week to set it up for a one-day shoot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do we have any more minutes for any more questions there? Did we get to them all in the QA? There was somebody was asking a question about Maya and animation. Was that further back up? Somebody
actually led us to yeah. Go ahead, you found it.
Sure. Yeah, there was somebody asked, this is probably a Scott question, is it better to learn rigging animation in Maya to export it to Unreal, or is it better to learn and stay in Unreal 5? When I say better, I mean which would get one more job ready?
That's a good question, very good question, and this is one of the few instances that I'm not going to dunk on Autodesk, and I would say learn it in Maya, because that's you know, at its inception it was an animation program. It's still to this date best at being animation, and I would say yes, if you're going to learn rigging and animation, the core concepts are best. That's where it's done best, right? Unreal is picking that up, and they are adopting, and they've got control rig and deformers and things in now, but they're a little bit, this is the one place they're behind the 8 ball. Maya, if you get an indie license or just a month trial or whatever, and just learn as much as you can in that month trial. If you don't want to pay for it, that's fine. And then take those concepts, though they go everywhere. If you're going into Houdini to rig and animate, or Unreal, it doesn't matter. Those concepts that Maya kind of evolved are the ones that are still used everywhere. Somebody
else was asking about virtual production and unions, and no, typically visual effects has been, that's why we're down the bottom of the credits, because we got no union, and we get overworked and underpaid, etc. But not necessarily the case. But it is no union has its effects on visual effects. There's always been talk of bringing one into visual effects, never really happened. In virtual production, though, there are certain cases, like being in the virtual art department does qualify you, I think in some cases, to be in the Art Directors Guild. There is ways now that virtual production is actually letting VFX peeps into some of the unions, so maybe even more of a good reason for doing it.
For me, it's very much like the Monty Python's Life of Brian, right? What have the unions ever done for me, other than safe working conditions, proper sleep, and the occasional fighting for my rate against inflation? It's one of those things where you see FX houses getting driven out of business on huge Academy Award winning shows, and there's definitely some room for improvement, let's phrase it that way, for how things happen on set. Fortunately, some of the unions around you while you're working on sets will set the day for you already. You know what I mean? So it's like you're going to have 8 to 12 hours to go home and sleep and come back, because the union, film set crew has that as one of their stipulations. So they affect you in a lot of ways that you don't realize. But yeah, it's one of the things where it's like it's high time for there to be a more organized discussion around rates and around expectations. And the unions have very clarified job descriptions, which sometimes are great, but sometimes people get into a union track and then they're in a funnel, and it's like, how do you go from a key grip to a gaffer and then to a cinematographer? And that can be hard inside the union system. But for most of it, it's like everybody wants the show to run smoothly. Everybody wants to be able to program it. At the end of the day, the good producers that you're going to choose to work with are going to want to treat their crew like human beings to the best of their ability. So, and those there's nothing that's kind of the purview of the unions.
And it's a good point, I think, and one which I didn't even think when I was in London, working for completely unpaid overtime, sometimes like 2 days, entire days in a row without going home. And no, it was a bit rough, I will admit, and it should have been better than it was. But it was certainly a good test to see. This is something people don't say that often. It was a good test to see how much did I actually want to be doing that thing. I'm not saying that as an excuse to mistreatment in the industry, but I think at some point some people give up a little too easily. I will also say though that it certainly should be better than it has been, and I've marched for that down the Oscars line wearing a green T-shirt. So I'm kind of in both camps on that. Somebody else, somebody was asking a question about the tracker and like which. I think the question was clarified in saying what is the best live production tracker. I think it's a really hard question to answer because they're all different and they all have different prices and they all do different things. The Moses type tracking is quite similarly priced, similarly functional. Then down towards the Vive Mars, which is getting really great reviews and gen locks and syncs, and it's only 5K as opposed to 50K. But it won't do as big of a space as the Vive Mars. It really just depends on the budget. That like I've used and been around the Moses and Stipe type trackers, and I have seen the Mars demo, and it looks great, and I hear really good things about it. And if I only had 5K to spend on a tracker, I'd buy that one.
Oh, I just think it's important to say that whoever is looking at that needs to know their specific use case. For instance, there's different systems across Moses and Stipe, and it comes to the outside in versus the inside out question, which we don't have to go into too technically, but there's some systems that are better at just tracking the camera within a space, and there's other systems that intend to track multiple cameras, multiple characters, props that might be in play. Those are best done on an outside-in system where there's witness cameras, and so these are some of the commercial grade questions that we invest in such a system.
I think Socrates was asked like, hey, is it a good idea to get married? And Socrates was like, absolutely get married. And one of two things will happen. You'll either have an amazing marriage and you'll have a great wife, or you'll have a terrible marriage and you'll become a philosopher. So with that applied to trackers, when people ask, what tracker should I get? I always tell them, absolutely the Vive. And they're like, but doesn't it crash a lot? And I'm like, exactly. It'll teach you how to look up problems on Unreal Engine. That's absolutely a skill you need to have. But the first Vive was a lot more crash prone. It's just like, why do you torture yourself? But the Mars is they've definitely improved it. But all of it still is very, very tricky to set up. But it's a great place to start, right? Like have 5 of your friends each throw in $1,000, pick up a cheap scrap tracker, throw up a green screen in your buddy's garage, and then figure out how to get the green screen to disappear with the trackers and do a comp thing. You'll learn everything you need to know just from doing that in-home setup. You'll go through a lot of the Unreal problems, and you'll be much more educated when you walk into a volume stage. You'll be surprised at how much that actually teaches you about what's happening around the volume, Yep.
And actually, I would like to add one thing. As a producer, I can make a recommendation on what is the best value in terms of production tracking, one that's currently configured and working.
That's right.
Getting into the indie side of things, I have seen a number of stages recently that have a volume, do not have tracking. There's basically nothing on offer there. You need a completely integrated system, and a lot of people are not getting up to speed fast enough, and it's just money sitting on a stage floor until you have those things set up and configured.
Yeah, when you walk into a volume stage, it's like, do you have a permanently installed tracking device? Do you have an Unreal operator that knows the wall and can demo it to me sometime this week? Do you have a proper wall tag? You know?
Do you have a computer that can even drive content for the wall?
Yeah, that's always a good one for sure. Wolfie, I can't wait for your popular philosophy book explained through the medium of virtual production.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, love and the art of Unreal Engine maintenance. It's an emotional tour de force. I'll rent you the whole seat, but you'll only need the edge.
Oh, brilliant. Well, that feels like a good point to end on. I don't think we can do better than that. Well, thank you, all of you, for being a part of this. I really appreciate you taking time out of your evening and sharing this with everybody. This is even more of a community-driven industry, virtual production, than I think both the worlds of production and visual effects have ever been for me. And that's one of the things that's fantastic about it, and something we value highly at CG Pro. And I love working with these guys. And thank you all for being here with us tonight and sharing your wisdom and time. And thank you also to everyone that's been listening and asking great questions. And if you want to find out more, please feel free to get in touch with us. We're all pretty accessible. If you want to find out more about what we do as a school, you can check out our website, becomecgpro.com. But regardless of whether you want to come take a class with us or not, please stay in touch and ask us questions. We love doing this stuff, and we're always happy to hear from people. So yeah, look forward to another one of these in whenever the next one is. And yeah, check out the podcast as well sometime, one every 2 weeks. But yeah, thanks again to everybody, and have a great evening.